I'll start out by saying I'm Brian Mabry with Kendig Keast Collaborative. We're the lead consultant on this project, which is to do a unified development code for Lubbock. Unified Development Code is a big book of rules and regulations about zoning and landscaping and signs, and another big part of that is urban design, and that is where Jason and Dover Cole really come into play because they are national experts on urban design. And so what has happened is Jason and his people have been here all this week. Over in the building is I'm blanking on the, Wells Fargo, sorry. The Wells Fargo building way up on the 15th floor, working and taking input from people as they kind of come and go in sort of an open design studio. And they have put together some renderings and conceptual drawings of what could turn out as a result of the adopted Unified Development Code. This is a process that is projected to culminate in adoption by City Council of the Unified Development Code in March of 2021. So it's a long process and a very important process, of course, because all of us are impacted by things like how land is used, how areas are designed. It makes our lives, hopefully better, makes the economy better, promotes health and safety and all kinds of things that are very important to everyone. So just wanted to say as well that my group, Kendig Keast Collaborative, have also been here this week conducting kind of stakeholder interviews with people with an interest in land development in the city. So we've talked to design professionals like architects and other kinds of designers. We've talked with business leaders. We've talked with neighborhood advocates and a few other types of people to kind of get their thoughts on what works well, what doesn't work so well under the current regulations, what they definitely want to see change, and what we shouldn't even think about touching. So there's all kinds of input we're getting, and we're kind of collating it all into one document that we'll provide to city staff that will have a summary of what we heard while we've been here. And I know Dover Cole has also been taking input as people come to their design studio to talk about what could make the city of Lubbock more, better designed. So again, this is a very important process and project, and I'm delighted you all are here. I think you're going to be really, like I said, amazed at some of the work that's been done in such a short period of time while Dover Cole has been here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jason King of Dover Cole and Partners to take you on.
Great. Let's see. Okay. Can you hear me? Turn this one off. Is everyone able to hear me? Great. So my name is Jason. Thanks for having us. As Brian said, we've been working late nights and early mornings and working around the clock up in the top of the spooky Wells Fargo building. If you've ever been there, or the old Lubbock Club, interesting place. We started off with a hands-on event. How many people in the room were there for the hands-on event? All right, great. So almost half of the people. Really good turnout. Over 55 people. We were at the Luca Firehouse Theater. People were working with us at table maps. We were explaining the ideas, we're talking about great codes, talking about best practices in planning, and then we were translating the ideas into presentations. Members of the community were giving presentations of the concepts. People were placing dots, red for what they didn't like, green for what they wanted to see more of. And we were touring. People were coming to our design studio and having conversations. We had 15 to 20 people per day, and we also got out into the community. We saw Larry's super cool shop working with neon and steel and glass, and it was pretty incredible. You remember doing this? We asked one word that comes to mind about Lubbock now and in the future. People filled these out, and Sue tallied them to create word clouds. One word that comes to mind about Lubbock now, It was funny. It was largely kind of negative. The word that came out the largest was bland. There was struggle and unimaginative and frustrating and disconnected. It was still friendly, and that's been our experience in Lubbock. Just the nicest people. Every single meeting that we've gone to, people invited us to meals and breakfasts and lunches and dinners and toured their houses. Friendly is good. When it comes to the future, one word that comes to mind about Lubbock in the future, every single word was positive. And this is a rare thing to see. People are hopeful that the future will be better than the past. You saw hopeful and diverse and equity. Exciting, friendly, flexible, green space. Vivacious is a word we haven't seen before in one-word cards. Opportunity, alive, hopeful, hope. That was interesting. We took the ideas that we got from the public, we took our meeting notes, the keypad polling results, the conversations that we had, and we boiled them down into 5 big ideas. And these 5 big ideas will be sort of like the chapters of this presentation that we're going to be giving. Energize and connect the downtown districts, readapt historic structures and add uses, safe, comfortable, and interesting streets, make it easier to park and move people around the downtown, stay authentic and unique by making it easier for small businesses to thrive. This is sort of the core of the Unified Development Code project going forward. Now, the way they communicated it, energize and connect the downtown districts. In our feedback, people were drawing areas that are blighted with disinvestment, and with a green marker, they were saying something here, like a green or a plaza. We showed pictures of plazas and squares, and the green dots showed that they really liked it. And there were some specific paths, like a path between Buddy Holly Ave and Avenue G all the way up to the Arts District. Opportunities that they had noticed that we gave to the designers, and we started to work on it. Now, it's been 10 years. 10 years ago, Dover Coleman Partners was working in this town, and a lot of great things have happened since then. The moving of the City Hall, the Pioneer Pocket Hotel, the new restaurants and cafes there are pretty exciting. And perhaps the most exciting thing is the Buddy Holly Center, right? It's Lubbock just understanding what it is and being that. And so you see, we've all been watching the brand new center rising and the construction. And it comes into a kind of area called the Civic Plaza, where there's the library and there's the theater and there's other big institutions. What if? What if the energy that's being created by the Buddy Holly Center filtered out? And the land development regulations allowed that area to become more than just big buildings and parking, right? As great as that is, it's coming off the highway, attending an event, and getting back on the highway. Sue looked at the area in between, lost space. She tried to imagine parking that was structured in new streets. What if? New hotels. She added art everywhere. Along 10th Avenue and 10th Street and Avenue N, there is already a lot of new projects in the work. She made it all green with solar panels and green roofs. Every time there was a blank wall that could not be aligned, she put in art, even coloring things blue. This is a large new hotel which is planned for that area. And in addition to the big projects like the hotels, she's putting in the smaller ones. Urban infill, places for people to live. Workplaces near the highway, places for people to work. She had found spots for parks, places for new streets and murals, hotels, capitalizing on the investment that's been made in that area and making it into a true arts district. That was pretty exciting. And we've seen this. In Miami, where we're from, there used to be an area by the highway, and it was a place where it was really just, it was a depot area. It was our word for it. Were warehouses. It was Wynwood. And it started with art. It started with food trucks and events, art walks like you're doing, farmers markets. And slowly that area did change. A lot of investment followed. People wanted to live, and artists wanted to work. We saw new public spaces and parks and great new streets. Art is economic development. Art is a huge magnet for investment, and Lubbock understands this. What we're talking about is just scaling up what Lubbock does pretty naturally already. Everywhere there's art. There's murals and there's sculptures. and there's quirky things, and there's things that are new and things that are older. The idea of using art as economic development comes pretty naturally to Lubbock. So we just kept looking for new spots where that art could happen. This is that spot between Buddy Holly Ave and Avenue G. This is an abandoned train track, you know? It goes all the way to the Deco building, and then it would come up to just about to the Arts District. You take that concept of art and reinvesting in places. What if? All across the country, places have been turning their alleys and the spaces in between into spots to be. This is Fort Collins in Colorado. You know, it's lights, it's hanging baskets. In Denver, Colorado, it's still an alley. It's still used by trucks and deliveries, but it's also an interesting space. And in Lubbock, where the streets are so wide and the human animal feels out there and defenseless, and you know, and the wind's whipping at you, and the buzzards are flying up above. Every once in a while, it might be nice to find these smaller spaces. What if? What you see in this rendering is the rail, the line stays just because that's cool. The buildings, a lot of them would be facing both the alley and the streets. A brewing company appears, coffee shops. This is a rendering that shows a few things going on. One of the things that it shows going on is the brick buildings remain, and up above them come the lofts that kids want to live in, and the urban living, younger people and older people living in less expensive formats. The important thing to this is to preserve these right-of-way, because eventually this sort of path, that kind of space, these smaller intimate spaces become highly valued amenities for people looking to live into the city. We kept going further. This is the Buddy Holly and Maria Elena Holly Plaza. So this is the plaza in the Depot District, right? And there's the statue here. And right now this is a plaza which is surrounded by, you know, this is Triple J, and here's the different bars and restaurants in the area. But people said, you know, it feels a little underutilized. Every once in a while, there's a dog jumping contest or whatever. There are, once every 3 years, someone rents out this space. But for the most part, it's sitting unused. We talked to the Parks and Rec department about this area, and they liked the idea of doing more with it. It's got to be sensitive to the environment around it. It's got to build on what's currently working. We imagine a space that has trees and has plantings, a spot with just a little bit of irrigation could create shade. We imagine a small amphitheater happening for concerts. This is an area that already has multiple concert venues, but you actually can't have too many of that. You could even imagine a music festival that has multiple things going on in different places. Talking to one of the people down there, they said, you know, what about a carousel? So we drew a carousel. But then we started talking to the business owners and the people in the area, and the vibe is actually more hip and young and beer and lighting and sunset and nighttime. So the possibility is there. But just building on what's the current feeling, the Depot District is one of the coolest areas. And just by adding trees and adding paths, sprinkling, the fence stays up because it needs to be a secure place when there aren't people in it, but nevertheless it could be a great, just a great addition to that area. How often do you get to design a plaza, a brand new urban plaza like that? The Buddy Holly statue remains, of course. The memorial trees all remain, and there's room for everything. The Depot District currently has, you know that you've arriving in there because the buildings are closer to each other, and you have the cool mid-century modern, and you have the neon lights, and you've got the big, beautiful murals. But it's also a really wide street. It's a wide street that's disconnected, one side to the other. Given how little traffic actually occurs there, one of the ideas brought to us was the idea of creating a kind of gateway there, so you know you've arrived from a different part of the city. JJ was imagining just simple interventions. These bulb-out trees reduce the crossing time. You put in the middle something, right? This is like a placeholder. It's like either an obelisk or some classical tradition. I think when the Depot District went to commission art there, it would be something bigger and brighter and scarier and cooler and chicer. But something. Put things in the way of cars. It slows them down. It makes it comfortable for pedestrians to move back and forth. This is a place where there will always be cars, but there should also be, it's a moment just to pause and to slow down and look around and get a feel for the place. Coming back to Broadway and Avenue M, down to the downtown area, one of the big ideas that came from the discussion that Overland, the consultant working on the downtown plan, has been leading. One of the big ideas is the idea that there is no central space in the downtown. There's no great plaza. So here's Broadway, right? Here's the First United Methodist Church. This is 13th Street. And in the middle are two buildings. One, there's the Community Health Center, publicly owned. It's actually a valued asset in the community, but they need more space. And then there's the Lubbock Power and Light. Talking to them, looking at their facility, that building's way past the design life that any architect ever imagined. So all of a sudden, it's looking like there's a square where there's opportunity. James Doherty was imagining in that spot a complete square, a square like you don't have yet. And within it, he divided up into multiple pieces. A square is about 2 acres, and there was room for everything. Bocce ball and kids area, outdoor games. So you put in a small plaza, pavilion. It could be a kiosk. It could be a restaurant. What it does is, this church, these grand churches are pretty rare, pretty astounding. This is probably the nicest in the downtown. And all of a sudden, it's not just a park. It's a park that gives a fitting view of truly spectacular architecture. Public investment, reliably, is followed by private investment. You could just start to imagine buildings coming and filling in these spaces. There's a whole lecture or discussion we could have about how the land development regulations currently disallow urban format buildings and how our job is to change the regulations to allow it. But let's just imagine a reformed regulatory environment with the downtown zoning that works and setbacks and lot coverages and all this stuff worked out. And imagine just people returning to Lubbock. It's happened in every downtown. We all know the stories of the places that have come back, and with street trees and with green spaces, places that attract people. And I would recommend, having seen this in multiple different cities, sometimes it needs the jump start. It needs the big infusion. It needs the public square. With bocce ball and a splash park, with soccer and baseball, with the cool cafe, and with playgrounds. That investment costs a bit at first, but when it comes to the property taxes that are generated and the sales taxes that are generated, in the end, downtown is really where you want to invest. What if? Now, we've had some experience with this. 10 years ago, we were in El Paso, Texas. We drew a similar drawing for San Jacinto Plaza. And if you've been there recently, you remember it's just a lot cooler than it used to be, right? And it's a place where El Paso meets downtown, that kind of thing. Then you go down Broadway for a bit, and then you reach this area, another large square. The old courthouse is located on it. Right now it's the Greyhound station, and as people who love cities love transit. But the Greyhound station area has a strange relationship with the city right now. Greyhound is pretty much how people get out and back into the city. It's sort of disconnected from downtown life and activity. And the city bus that operates in that space at the Greyhound station is also a service that is looking to expand and finds that their client base, really the students, this is really far away from the students. Their ideal location to operate public transit service would be farther down on Broadway and closer to the university. So if, Greyhound is looking to move and the bus service is looking to move, and you've got the grand former old courthouse, and there's a lot of things happening there. There's a lot of employees in the federal building, and yet around it you see the empty parking spaces and buildings that are boarded up. What if? The same principles. Public investment attracts private investment. This is an area where you could go really high. This is an area where new hotels could locate. It's got great access to the highway. It's a spot where you can imagine, life happening on the street again. Buddy Holly Avenue is sort of like the nexus. You have Broadway, and then you go down Buddy Holly. This is where those two those two thoroughfares, all of that energy converge. It's easy to render. It takes a lot of time. We don't know how long stuff like this could take. The outcome is certain. The return to the downtown, bringing people and investment back to it. The timeline is the question. One of the things that would really help is if that depot area, the transit square, actually could host a food hall. You probably know food halls. There's great historic food halls in Boston and Charleston, and now new food halls are happening in Atlanta and Seattle. Food hall, not a food court. Food court is my generation. That's out. But food hall, which is totally different, although it's basically just restaurants, one after another, next to each other, serving different kinds of food. Food hall. It's set up just like the food hall at Charleston. And then people dining. People potentially dining in the greens, food trucks arriving, all kinds of variety. So this would be a different square. This is a square for eating and drinking and for socializing, unlike the other one, which is recreational. But they sort of bookend Broadway in a way that's interesting. That's where the lights would start to go on. That's where redevelopment and investment would start. And the Plaza, there's a tradition of the Plaza, the place where people meet. My favorites, Old Mesilla, Albuquerque, and Santa Fe, El Paso, Lubbock, the list goes on. There's a Hispanic urbanism tradition that is just as relevant to this area. So yeah, the square, the perfect square with buildings around it. But that concept's applicable to a lot of different things. Right now it's not possible. It's not possible to create little spots for kids, the little pocket parks and the little playgrounds. It's only allowed in certain zoning districts, has to be a certain minimum acreage. It's hard to put it in places where thoroughfares meet. So the square is a place for kids, small little pocket parks. The square is a place just to sit between two different buildings where the wind is blocked and people are sitting outside. And it could be anything. This could be chain stores, or it could be a Whataburger, it could be a Taco Bell. But it'd be your best Taco Bell experience if you're sitting in a plaza and you're out on the street. The weather is so nice in Lubbock that if we make it possible, and even there are some ways to incentivize it, you can imagine a lot more people outside. Safe, comfortable, and interesting streets. People were drawing orange lines for sidewalks and green lines, walkability. They were talking about just better sidewalks. You know, the thing that's different from the downtown, from the suburbs, is the downtown is the place you come and walk. Now the comp plan Lubbock 2040 talks about this, and it talks about all the different pieces of the street. But it's more than just the street. The pedestrian is a very fickle creature, especially in Texas. The pedestrian just needs everything perfect. Otherwise, the pedestrian gets into the Silverado and takes that mode instead. The pedestrian needs more than just a great sidewalk and shade. The pedestrian needs an interesting experience, safe, comfortable, and interesting. And you remember during the hands-on event, we showed this image. We asked what people thought about it. Roughly 90% of people loved it. And we showed another image, the blank walls. And just about everybody, or at least 72% of people hated that. And it's scary, it's weird. You know, this is not Lubbock, but a lot of the new downtown buildings that are locating have big blank walls right on Broadway. The code would make that impossible to do. The code would make it so that way there's something to look at. You're able to look through a window and out of space. At the same time, street trees and the benches and the barrels and the shade, lots of places to sit, lots of interesting signage that works for pedestrians. Some of the coolest signs I've seen are in Lubbock. There's like a local culture of cool signs in Lubbock somehow. Yeah, some more of that. And then there's another thing I haven't seen here yet, and it's the parklet. The parklet was where you take a couple parking spaces and you turn it into a spot where a restaurant could have on-street dining, you know. You see these popping all up. These are a symbol that a city's interested in itself again. And it can be between the Silverados. But it's a spot where just a couple spaces are lost, and for a little while there's umbrellas, and there's people outside, and there's people dining. We took all those concepts, put it all together, brought it to the Depot District. So this is Buddy Holly Ave. We're looking north. We're looking up. There's Triple J. There's a cool mid-century modern building. And right now, the way this is configured is there's 2 lanes going that way, and there's 2 lanes coming this way on a street that sees less than 4,000 cars per day. So this is designed, this sort of configuration works for 30,000 cars per day. It sees almost 10% of that. That means you can right-size the street, and you can do interesting things. You could turn these in a way, and you can actually create a spot for the parklet and for trees, you know. Triple J has a spot where you can sit outside, but it's little, and there's only 4 tables, and nobody wants to go out there. People want to be near more people. Here, all that's happening is 1 lane is being reconfigured, repurposed. Could even just be temporary. And this restaurant and every other restaurant could get space out there, out front. The parklet concept works even with the farmers market, especially with the farmers market, because it actually allows these businesses to be participating in the farmers market, which has been a huge success, in a way that they're not currently able to yet. And maybe, you know, you want to take a small step. There was a town, Coeur d'Alene in Idaho. They weren't sure about the parklet concept. So they're actually, and I was just there a week ago, 2 weeks ago, they're temporarily installed the parklets just to see. Does it work for the business owners? This used to be 2 lanes on this side without any parking. So they took one of the lanes and turned it into the diagonal parking and the parklet. And all of this is all temporary construction as they test it out to see if it works for the businesses and if it stays lively and interesting. The Depot District is really cool and has its own vibe. You don't want to mess with that. Experimental, tactical urbanism, you know, just to see, if it works, is something we recommend. This is brand new. All the stuff had just been laid. It's interesting because people are sitting there and having a drink and having some food. The businesses like Moontime started to add the flower boxes and the benches and the stuff that wasn't there before, and the lights. So it isn't just the parklets, it's also the street. With people arriving by foot, the investment in the streetscape suddenly made sense. Make it easier to park and move around the downtown. People were placing Ps for parking garages next to greens. They were saying comprehensive parking plan, accessible routes, move people. So it's not just parking, right? It's also about there's a spot to park once and go to a lot of different places. And this guy was really interesting. He was talking about how he ran Uber for a little while, just for some extra money on the weekends or whatever. And he would take students down all the way to the Depot District. And he kept going back and forth between Depot District and the university. And he said, so that's a spot where the city should do something. Another young lady, she had, her and her table had all these Post-its, right? They wanted to see print shops and coffee shops and convenience stores and housing everywhere. Specialized shops, the parking garages, repairing the streets. Her table and the other tables put a lot of green dots when it looked like buildings that were revitalized and brought back. She complained that as a young person, there's just not a lot downtown for her. Now, the interesting thing is that there's a lot of space to build. The tornado did a lot of damage in the 1970s, catastrophic amount of damage. But then the bulldozers kept going. In order to create surface parking, this looks like, Game of Thrones, and the dragon flew over and everything was caught on fire in order to create surface parking, And that's unfortunate. So much was lost. The old photographs of the great buildings that used to be there. But as urban planners, it's also really exciting. This is a lot of area to build upon. Orange is all of the surface parking. And just with the 2 or 3 tactical parking garages, even just 2, one in the east and one in the north, we could catch a lot of parking, and there's a lot of room to build. Now, there's a lot of parking, but at the same time, it also feels like there's nowhere to park. every time you pull into one of these spots, someone, owns it and someone maintains it, and someone doesn't want you to park there, understandably. So there's all this surface parking, but there's this piecemeal arrangement in which different owners, are using it at different times. The downtown looks empty because there's so much parking at the same time, there's nowhere to go. And this big idea is to create a downtown parking authority. Create one organization or one person who's responsible for the parking downtown. That person can coordinate with the different business owners. When are people at Red Rooster? When are people at Max? And try to make it so that way, these facilities are better utilized. They manage any public garages and lots. They coordinate the shared parking. You can even take parking enforcement off the back of the police. It's expensive and they don't like doing it. And you could actually give it to the authority to actually hire the people that would go around and enforce the parking. And this group, these parking authorities, these managers, they're just parking geeks, and they're really interested in it, and they go to conferences, and they conduct studies, and they're always looking. Parking is actually so complicated. There's so many ways to park cities. There's no one solution. You need an expert that's going to mix all the different options in order to make the use of investment. And eventually there's going to be parking garages, but the parking garages, as an urban designer, shouldn't look like this, because it's pretty surprising that there's even a person right there, because there's not much to look at. It's just a big parking garage. It's usually a dead space. It's a spot people won't walk. That one's in Covington. This one's in Missoula, Montana. It looks a little better. Here, what they have on the bottom floor is they have one store that wraps this corner. And then instead of looking at the cars, you're looking at art of a kind. Not bad. That's a little better. But the blocks in Lubbock are really large, 500 feet by 500 feet. So you're able to do something more like they do in San Jose. In San Jose, there's a parking garage in there, but it's behind places where people live and places where people shop. It's behind the businesses. It's essentially hidden parking within the larger structure. Your blocks allow for that. So that would be one of the rules in the new code. You have parking garages, absolutely, but line them. Make parking, keep parking from being the dominant visual image when you're in the downtown. And then there's more that we can do. One of the things we'll recommend is that there are certain buildings, small buildings, that you want to adapt and reuse. And right now, the parking requirements really make it hard to do that. Right now, what happens, and this is a graphic done by Ali, and it really just explains everything great. Here's a 5,000 square foot building, and here's another 5,000 square foot building. This one's on 2 different floors. In order for these for these buildings to park themselves, here's the building on the left and here's the one on the right, they had to knock down the building on the side. If you want to revive one building, you've got to knock another one down in order to provide for parking. So this building knocked down this building in order to create parking spaces, and this building knocked down this building, more or less, in order to create parking spaces. And that's one of the reasons that the downtown looks like 500 dragons flew over it blowing fire, is because just in order to park it at all, the requirements were that they had to create on-street parking and surface parking. So what we would say in this new code is these smaller businesses where you want to turn the lights on would be exempt from parking. They wouldn't have to provide. If someone builds a tower with 160 units of residential, and that will happen, they have to provide the parking. That's more than 5,000 square feet. If a hotel comes in, they have to provide parking. At the same time, though, in our graphic, we see room to reduce parking all across the board. It'll either be no parking required or reduced parking. The private sector will figure out the parking. There isn't any reason for the public sector to get involved as much as it has. That'll be one of the recommendations. So a building like this, for instance, is 10,000 square feet. They'd have to provide 10 to 20 parking spaces, but actually they'd have to provide 7 to 15 parking spaces, but they wouldn't have to provide 20 or 30 parking spaces. So that means that building, if the lights, they're doing just fine. But if they wanted to expand or change their use, they wouldn't have to knock down the building next to them. They wouldn't be required to do that. But not just parking. You're going to reach a point where there's a lot of things going on downtown, and you're still not going to have enough room for all the cars that want to come, because people are small and cars are big. So this is the idea that we heard from the Uber driver. This was the trolley, the rubber tire circulator. These things, you're already using them on game day, and you use them for the market, and you use them on events. But one that ran regularly from the university down to the Depot Square, to the Depot area, to the Depot District, would be one that people would like to ride. They've got an old-fashioned look to them. Tourists like to get on them. Kids like to take pictures of them and to ride them. They tend to attract more people, a wider variety of people than the bus. You know, the bus is essential. It's the lifeblood of the community. It keeps people moving around who don't have any other option. But the circulator is a fun thing that people will rent for parties and that businesses will sometimes advertise on the side of. A lot of times these things actually pay for themselves. A real estate developer looking to build condos downtown will want to put the name of their lofts on the circulator. The private sector helps pay for the circulators. So that would be a good idea. And the more transit you add to the downtown, the less you actually need to park it. We were just looking at possible routes that a circulator could run. You know, down Broadway, up and around to the Arts District, down and around to the Depot District, and up to the university. Buildings like this are eminently adaptable. Be a Goodyear for as long as you want to be a Goodyear. But buildings like this, if we waive the parking requirements and let people get there a different way, they can have a whole bunch of different things. Within that one large building could be living units in a grocery store, coffee and restaurant. All those uses that girl was pasting with sticky notes, just about all of them could fit in just one building like this, if we make that possible. There's also another important thing. You go to certain cities, a lot of cities, and you find all of these banners up that say that you've arrived, and there's the flower boxes and the nice street lamps and the welcome signs and the sculptures and places for the trash. These are maintained by downtown management districts, and this is something that you don't quite have yet. You have a retailers association, you have the TIF group, you've got the farmers market people, you've got a lot of people doing great things downtown. You've got Chamber of Commerce. But there's not one group whose mission in life it is to get people downtown and make downtown look, you know, fun and clean and interesting. And that's the management districts, you know. There's usually some special fund that pays for the things like the flowers. There's a board of directors. They get together, the downtown property owners, and they pay for things like branding and marketing and facade improvements, downtown activities, beautification projects. It's time, you know. If you want your downtown to succeed, you're going to need someone who works on that. And we've seen that successfully, you know, cities like El Paso and Miami and Houston, downtown Huntsville, all these places all have some group that speaks for the downtown. One of my favorites is in Missoula, Montana. This is a real comeback story. They've got, similarly, they've got merchants associations and TIF boards, but they've got the Downtown Partnership, which administers it all. And the Downtown Partnership makes sure that this is a spot where people can walk, and there's activity going on both sides. They make sure that if the trees die, that the trees are replanted. They're allowing sandwich boards, but they make sure the sandwich board isn't in the way. They're keeping people moving. That's how you bring back downtowns. Now, at the same time, there's a whole lot of change we're discussing here, but stay authentic and unique. Lubbock actually has a real authenticity and uniqueness to it, especially in the downtown. So create new draws and create destinations, but at the same time, don't lose the identity. And for the small business owners, the codes are providing, you know, the codes are a big burden. It's hard to get a permit, it's hard to do anything. And code compliance is also an issue. For the people who are playing along, there's others that are not. Whatever happens in the downtown needs to continue to help and foster things like the First Friday Art Trail, which is amazing, tomorrow, and the downtown farmers market. We don't want to get in the way of that. We don't want to get in the way of any of that. We want to encourage and support that. But there's this thing that we've been working on. There's a way of taking the downtown current zones, mixing them with your cultural and historic districts, and creating new zones. I'm going to show you. Right now you've got these. These are the 5 or 6 central business district zones. And then you've got this other thing, which has no real status. It has no real legal weight. The Arts District and the Depot District, right? This is a line that has been drawn. And there's some incentive programs that says this Arts District is important and the Depot District is unique. However, there's no advocate for it within the land development regulations. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the Arts District and take the Depot District, can even be done with the Historic District Overtown, and actually make that culture you're trying to enhance and support the basis of the new zoning districts, you know. Broadway, Depot, Arts, 17th, West Broadway, and University would mix zoning and incentives, economic development and regulation. Along certain streets, that would be prioritized. These, listening to the Overland, the people working on the downtown master plan, they say Lubbock needs 1 or 2 postcard streets that are done so well and have so much investment that one would want to put it on a postcard, you know. Focus there, and then from that, new development will follow. And one of the ways of doing that in terms of an urban designer is you require them to have great shop fronts like this one in the Depot District. It's got everything an urban designer, everything you could hope for. There's a lot of windows for people to look in. There's spots to sit, there's shade, it's uplit, it's bright, it's interesting, it's exciting at night. That kind of thing we can require, and we're going to waive parking, we're going to cut the parking requirements, but we're going to ask that in the code, and this is all pages from the code, we're going to ask for shop fronts and not blank walls, something to look at, and for an eyes on the street, people looking down at what's going on. That's what keeps streets safe, windows on streets. And maybe occasionally there's even some spots where not just an awning, but a marquee or a gallery or an arcade, one of these big structures that are over the street and keep you in the shade. That could even be possible. In these situations, the parking is behind the principal building. We're going to introduce a whole variety of building types the downtown hasn't seen in a long time. Historic building types that you used to have that were lost due to tornado or fire or neglect. There's a variety of, you know, art is not just what you hang on a wall. This should also be art in the architecture. And that'll be part of this new code. And what that looks like is this. So there's the Crest building. They're going to turn it into a winery and a wine tasting. And there's every once in a while these gaps, like the missing teeth in the smile of my 6-year-old. And we can fill these gaps. We just have to direct how it happens. What if? What if we require the businesses to build a great bottom floor? And that's all we're asking. And if that's all they're giving us, 1 story, that'd be fine. But by incentivizing it through the lot coverage and the height and all the tools we have in the bulk regulations, every once in a while, the buildings can be even higher and a high quality. And it doesn't mean you need traditional architecture. It could be crazy modern architecture. It could be something inspired by the mid-century modern, or totally avant-garde, and glass and steel and cantilevering and scary and blob architecture. Great. That all fits actually with sort of the Lubbock aesthetic. But what we would ask is that this be the spot that everybody cares about and looks at and makes sure that the pedestrian experience, the finicky Lubbock pedestrian, has a safe, comfortable, and interesting experience. There's so many more things we could talk about. As the city develops, we're afraid that some of these architectural gems would be lost. This is Texas. You don't want to put new regulations on yourself. Historic districts make everybody scared. But there are things called conservation districts that would prevent the teardowns of some of these mid-century modern gems. And we've just been outlining those areas where buildings should remain. We're going to make the code simpler. Right now there's 68 possible land uses. It's hard to know where you fit in. The list goes on. Let's see. There was a tombstone maker. There was a graveyard inspector. There was a cemetery something. There was the boneyard artist. You had basically 15 ways to describe someone who made gravestones in your current. It was so morbid. And we don't need those anymore. People, when they die, are a lot less concerned about that. And so we could actually summarize some of these 18th century uses that you have and bring in new uses like the brewery, which isn't discussed. There's not a spot for a daycare. The food trucks, parking garages, even a supermarket didn't exist in your current use list. And so that meant it was just a little bit of a disincentive to a developer to have to go and get a special exception in order to do something like a daycare. So this is something that we're going to update. We talked last time, we don't have to talk about this. Your code was written largely in 1950. It was updated in the 80s. There's been piecemeal updates to it, but the code is a problem. The code is still standing in the way of investment. And we've done an inventory of that, and I will spare you. Thing is, Lubbock is still growing out. Lubbock is still a place for single-family houses and driving, and there's a lot of land for sale on the edge. And it isn't enough just to give Lubbock one walkable center, right? Because a lot of people live their life outside of the downtown and farther areas. So the same concepts, the walkable mixed-use urbanism that we were talking about in the downtown, could be applied to these different areas. Sometimes it could just be a small intervention. Sometimes along major boulevards like MLK, for instance, where there is just not much going on, we can incentivize something more than just a single-family house. It could be townhomes, especially along the major streets. There could be apartment buildings and mansion apartment buildings, higher densities and more people living. You got to be careful with this. You don't want this sort of thing to happen everywhere. If this is a well-established neighborhood, a historic district, that person is not inclined to be the neighbor to college students. But there are other neighborhoods where they would like more ability to sell land, to develop, and to mix people who are renting with people who are owning. This is a tool to be used very strategically and surgically, but it could allow certain spots to see new life. And then, way out, this is 19th Street, pretty far out Inner Avenue. This keeps going west. This is West Lubbock. There's empty land like this with for sale signs. Kenneth was imagining the same interconnected network of streets, blocks roughly the size as the downtown. He was placing amenities. He was essentially drawing a new village, a new town, a new tiny downtown in these areas. Instead of single-family house subdivision endlessly into the distance, or even a large lot subdivision, what he was imagining was a complete community. What that looks like is this. And this is really cool. And he just made this in like 2 days. This is $2 billion worth of investment that Kenneth just came out of his sleeve somehow. This would be a destination. This would be, your economic development people would take people to this neighborhood and say, this is where you can live. If you're not interested in living in downtown living, if you want the single-family house, you could have a single-family house, but you could also have it in a community with a mix of building types for a mix of different people. This is a community that could support a small Main Street, off of 19th especially. One could live there, and they could walk to the Main Street on a Saturday morning and walk back without ever needing a car. There is accessory dwelling units for older people. There's affordable living that has dignity. And when you do that, when people live in complete, compact, and connected communities, less people have yards, and so you have the grand green spaces that people share. This is the small town hall, or in this case, really, in this community, it would be it could be at first a sales center, but eventually it would be a community center. All of this is streets that are lined with trees and with shade. These are safe places to cross. None of this is possible. Developers wouldn't be able to do it under the current regulations. And interestingly, people say, well, people in Lubbock don't want to live like that. They want to live on 2 acres, house in the middle of the lot. And a lot of people do, and that's fine. But when we just did this survey with people, we gave them red and green dots, and we asked them to place red dots on things they didn't want and green dots on things they did. The number one image that they liked was this one. A community in which there's a sidewalk and there's a porch within conversation distance to the sidewalk, and the streets are a little bit narrower and there's a lot more trees and the houses are close together. It's also generational. Younger generation always wants something different than their parents' generation, and they're less interested in the conventional subdivision. And if Lubbock wants to compete economically and attract investment and young people and older people and executives and the CEOs who can move companies, then Lubbock's going to need neighborhoods that are more interesting than the cookie cutter ones that we see. And this happens all over the place. Serenbe in Atlanta has the main street. This is all built. This is all built in the last 10 years. It looks historic, but it's new. They have the main street. They have the attached dwelling units. They have the single-family houses. Newtown, St. Charles, the architecture looks different because it's St. Louis. It's a lot of brick. But they've got the community garden. There's still single-family houses, but you would, at one point in your life, you grow up here, and then you can own a unit here, and then perhaps you're renting a unit above the main street. Wherever you are in your life, there's a spot for you in these new communities. And they can accommodate the CVS's and the Taco Bells and the Whataburgers and the Burger Kings on the main street in a different kind of format. By virtue of building densely in one area, you're able to reserve open space in another. And these are happening in places where they don't have the median income, high median income you have in Lubbock. Places where they just don't have the buying power that you have in Lubbock. If it can happen in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's been happening more and more outside of Montgomery, a town that's just focused on becoming a place that attracts factories and the executives that manage these factories, it can happen in Lubbock. And this is it's a walkable lifestyle. It's a social lifestyle that younger people especially are seeking. And El Paso, Texas is a place where 10 years ago we did a process like this, and some of the new subdivisions now have those main streets. They have the attached units, and they have the single family, and it's all within a 5-minute walk. El Paso is a place that thought it would be impossible, and after one was done, now there's several. And there's these little new centers forming in the Chihuahuan Desert, and they look like oases of trees and elms, and these are cool places. So that was a lot. That was an hour's worth of stuff. We're right at the end. 10 years ago when we were here, we drew this rendering. There's the Crest building. It was old. It was back before there was SketchUp and the computer models, and everything had to be hand-drawn and watercolored. And James Doherty did this, and this is looking down Broadway. And 10 years ago, he added the yellow color, and he said the lights need to come on. In some ways, it was a little sad to see that Lubbock hadn't come as far forward as we would have hoped 10 years ago, But when we see the Buddy Holly Center, we see the investment like that Crest Center is going to be a winery, and you see the different projects, the bike lanes that are in place, and all the cool stuff that's happening in the Depot District and the new hotels that are happening. It gives you, I think the next 10 years in Lubbock are going to be pretty cool. Anyway, thank you very much. Thanks for all the time that you gave us. Thanks for all the insight, all the people who came down to the studio, the food you shared, the cookies that Mont brought. Thank you for all of that. I want to give everyone here a big hand because we appreciate all the help this week.